We put a lot of focus into investing into a pension, but what about taking money out? In this video, we'll look at options you have when it comes to drawing from your pension and also what levels of income you can actually expect. I'm going to use a £250,000 pension pot as an example. Now, some of you may look at that and feel you've got aspirations way beyond that, while others may feel that you're nowhere near that. But whatever size your pension pot is, you can still apply what we'll discuss in this video. When I'm talking about a pension pot, I'm specifically referring to a defined contribution pension as opposed to a defined benefit pension. Now, I'm not going to be able to cover every option, but the main two ways to take income from a pension is either via drawdown or an annuity, or of course a combination of the two. In either case, you're able to take 25% of that pension pot tax-free. You have a choice about how you take that tax-free cash. You can take the 25% all at once in one go, and that means that's completely tax-free, and then the remaining 75% will be liable for tax when you take that income. Or you can leave it invested, and then when you do draw that income, every income payment that you get, 25% of that won't be liable for tax. It really comes down to what needs you have when you retire. So the first option you have when it comes to taking income is going to be drawdown. This is where you keep the money invested, and you keep that flexibility, but your returns will be dependent on the market. Your other option is to use an annuity. This is where you're going to hand your money to an insurer for a guaranteed income. You lose flexibility in return for security. Let's have a look at the level of income we can expect by using drawdown. To get an idea, we need to use a withdrawal rate, and this is where the popularized 4% rule comes in. This is the amount that we can safely withdraw from our pension, adjusting for inflation and not run out of money. So the idea is that you leave the money invested, and then in the first year you take 4% of your pension pot, and in each subsequent years you then adjust for inflation. So you increase the amount you withdraw each year depending on what inflation is that year. And the idea is that the average return for the pension will grow more than what you're withdrawing. And this is estimated to last you around 30 years. Using our £250,000 pension pot, a 4% withdrawal means we have a £10,000 per year income that then gets adjusted for inflation. If we were able to push that withdrawal rate to 5%, our yearly income would then start at £12,500. This also assumes that we're going to leave the full £250,000 invested and not take the tax-free cash. If we did want to take that 25%, say for example we wanted to pay down our mortgage, then that would leave us with £187,500. At 4%, that gives us an annual income of £7,500, and at 5%, that gives us an annual income of £9,375. It should be noted that higher withdrawal rates have worked in the past, in the region of 6 or 7%, but you would only know that in hindsight. You can't guarantee that, and that's why 4% is deemed the safe withdrawal rate. You also can't just look at average returns for two different time periods, because two people with the exact same average return are going to get very different outcomes, because the one that may experience poor market returns at the start of their retirement is much more likely to run out of money than if you experience a downturn much later on in your retirement. And this is known as sequencing risk. This is a risk of a market downturn soon after you start taking retirement. When you combine that market downturn with your withdrawals, your account value is going to be falling straight away, and it therefore never really has the chance to recover. Whereas if you have a market downturn 10 years into your retirement, you've had 10 years where your account value has actually been going up in value, because it's likely that it'll be returning more than your withdrawal rate. You can slightly reduce that downside risk by adjusting your bond to equity ratio, but the more bonds you have in your portfolio, you're also then going to be reducing your expected return. And that's why 4% tends to sit in that happy middle ground. In reality, a fixed withdrawal rate never really works as planned. It's just to give you an idea. You're not suddenly going to run out of money. You have the ability to course correct. And that's one of the biggest advantages of drawdown, is you have that flexibility. If you really needed to, you have the ability to adjust your discretionary spending to match that level of income. And just like we do in our normal lives now, we might not go on that holiday, or we might not go to that restaurant. We have that ability to adjust. And you also have the ability to choose what part of your pension you take the income from. It's likely when you're at that stage, you're going to have multiple asset classes, a mix of equities, bonds, and cash or money market funds. And when equity is doing really well, it makes sense to take that income from the equity portion, because you're going to be in profit. You're taking it when it's going up. But then when equity is having a downturn, maybe bonds are then outperforming equity. Well, then it makes more sense to take that from the bond portion. If both equity and bonds underperforms, then you have the ability to use cash, and you can wait for the equity markets to recover before then returning to taking that income from the equity. Going back to those figures, the first thing you may notice that it doesn't seem like that much income for what seems like a very big pension pot. Doesn't actually produce that much. But remember, this is likely not going to be your only income source. It could be that you have the state pension. It also could be you have investments from things like ISAs. It's also likely that your liabilities will reduce as you get older. Hopefully you've paid down your mortgage, so housing costs won't be that big expense that it was before. And also, you're no longer contributing to your savings and investments. You may no longer have the same child dependencies. And also, because of the reduced income, it may bump you down a tax band. So the main benefits with pension drawdown is flexibility. The money stays yours and you can pass it on. The main downside is the risk of running out of money if markets perform badly or withdrawals are too high. Let's now have a look at how that compares to taking income via an annuity. Just before we do, if you want to discuss anything that we cover in this video, you can join my Discord community and we can talk about it in more detail. It's the top link down below. So when it comes to annuities, there's so many variables that go into the rate that you actually receive. Your age and your health being the main ones, and they're essentially determining how long you're expected to live. The annuity provider needs to calculate how long they need to pay you for. When applying, it's almost like the opposite of health insurance, where you're almost trying to convince them you're less healthy than you actually are. After that, the rate then depends on the type of annuity that you select. And there's so many different options here, whether you have inflation protection, whether you have a fixed term or a lifetime annuity, whether that income transfers to a partner when you die. For this example, it's based on a healthy 65-year-old with income rising at a fixed 3% per year. It's a lifetime annuity, and half of the income will go to a partner after death. This is just a comparison site, so it will depend on the provider, but this is estimating that we'll get an annual income of £9,584 in the first year. That's then going to increase by 3% each year. I've also added here a guarantee period of 5 years. That means if the individual dies in the first 5 years of taking income, the full income from the annuity is still received, generally to the partner. We've also taken away the 25% tax-free cash, so the amount that we've given to the annuity provider is £187,500. So this works out as a return of 5.11%. We can also see that based on the amount that we've handed over, it would take about 19.5 years to break even. So this is where whether it's a good or bad decision to use the annuity, you'll only know in hindsight and depending on how long you live. This type of annuity, of course, is not going to be suited to everyone, and that's why it's so unique to you and your individual circumstances. For example, here I've selected a lifetime annuity, which means it's going to continue paying until the person dies, and in this case also going to pass 50% on to a partner. But you could also opt for a fixed term annuity. So you could opt for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And because it's fixed, the insurance company knows the maximum amount that they're going to have to pay, and therefore likely going to give you a better rate. And we do this because we also know our expenditure is likely going to keep reducing as we get older. We're going to consume less, we're going to go on less trips, we're able to do less. So you may decide to get the higher rate to cover your initial years soon after retirement, and then opt to live off your other forms of income after that period. Annuities have also grown massively in popularity in the last few years, simply just because interest rates have been higher. Although interest rates have been coming down for the last year or so, they're still much higher than they were in the last decade where we had ultra low interest rates. And from an annuity provider's perspective, because the rates that they can receive on cash money markets and bonds was much lower, they just weren't exciting or enticing for clients to use annuities. So when you take the annuity out, whatever's happening with interest rates or where the annuity providers think interest rates will go in the future will play a massive role in the rate you get. Not something you can control, but just something to think about. So the main benefits of using an annuity in general is that you get that guaranteed income. It's regardless of market performance. But the main downside is the loss of flexibility. That capital is usually gone unless the guarantees are built in, and you may die earlier than expected and not receive the full amount back. What people tend to do in practice is have a bit more of a blended approach. So for example, you may have the state pension plus an annuity for your essentials, and then you might use a drawdown pension to cover your variable and more discretionary spending. I also haven't mentioned tax because this will be way too long, but it is important to consider the implications of each option and what you do with the tax-free cash. A lot of people get tempted to take the 25% straight away, and if you're not paying down something like a mortgage, you've got to think what you're going to do with that money. In this example, if we took the full 25%, that would be about £62,500. And bearing in mind, you can only put 20,000 into a stocks and shares ISA. What you're going to do with the rest of it, if you then invest it, you're then going to have tax implications on the amount that you invest. And if your idea is just to keep the money invested anyway, then you may as well just keep it in the pension. And then every time you take the income, you'll get 25% of it tax-free. I'll leave it there. I hope you found that useful. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments.